Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Speakeasy Daily Conversations. I'm Olivia, and today's episode is going to be one of the most real and emotional conversations we've had so far. Not just because of the topic, but because of how deeply it connects to everyday life.
And I'm Ethan. Yes, today we're going to talk about relationships, self-worth, and overthinking. These are things that many people experience but often don't fully understand. And sometimes we don't even realize how much our thoughts are affecting the way we feel.
I think what makes this topic powerful is that it's not just about relationships with other people. It's also about the relationship you have with yourself.
Exactly. And many times, the way you see yourself, your self-worth, becomes the foundation for everything else. It affects how you react, how you communicate, and even how you interpret situations.
And then overthinking comes in.
Yes, and it makes everything more complicated.
Ethan, let me start with something simple but very real. Why do you think people overthink so much in relationships?
I think overthinking often comes from a desire for certainty. People want to feel secure, they want to understand what's happening, and they want to avoid getting hurt. But the problem is, relationships don't always provide clear answers.
That's true. People are complex, emotions are complex, and not everything is always clear.
Exactly. So when something is unclear, the mind tries to create meaning. But instead of staying neutral, it often goes in a negative direction. It starts asking questions like, what if something is wrong? Or what if they don't care?
And those questions don't just stay as questions, they start turning into beliefs.
Yes, and that's where the problem begins. Because once a thought feels like a belief, it starts affecting your emotions.
Let's slow that down a little. So, first, there's a situation, then a thought, then a feeling?
Exactly. For example, someone doesn't reply to your message. That's the situation. Then the thought might be, they're ignoring me. And then the feeling becomes anxiety or sadness.
But the thought is not necessarily true.
Exactly. The situation is real, but the interpretation is not always accurate.
I think this happens a lot, and sometimes people don't even realize that they're creating those interpretations.
Yes, because it feels automatic. It feels like the thought just appears and it feels real.
And then the emotions follow immediately.
Exactly. And before you know it, you're already feeling something strong, even though the situation itself was very small.
Let's connect this to self-worth. Why does low self-worth make overthinking worse?
Because when someone has low self-worth, they already have a negative belief about themselves. So when something unclear happens, their mind connects it to that belief.
Can you give an example?
Yes, if someone believes I'm not good enough, then when something small happens, like a delayed reply, they might think they don't care about me because I'm not important.
So the situation is not the real problem. The belief is.
Exactly. The situation just activates the belief.
That's very deep. So, in a way, relationships don't create insecurity, they reveal it.
That's a very powerful way to say it. Yes, relationships often bring out what is already inside us.
And that can be uncomfortable.
Yes, but it can also be an opportunity to understand yourself better.
Let's talk about emotional reactions. Why do people react so strongly to small things in relationships?
Because the reaction is not always about the present moment. Sometimes it's connected to past experiences. If someone has experienced rejection before, even a small situation can trigger that same feeling again.
So, it's not just about now, it's about what happened before?
Exactly. The mind remembers emotional pain, and it tries to protect you from experiencing it again.
But sometimes that protection becomes overreaction.
Yes, because the mind doesn't always know the difference between past and present.
Let's imagine a situation. You send a message, and the other person doesn't reply for a long time. Walk me through what happens in an overthinking mind.
First, there's a simple observation, no reply. Then the mind starts asking questions. Why haven't they replied? Then it moves into assumptions. Maybe they're ignoring me. Then it becomes personal. Maybe they don't care. And finally, it becomes emotional. I feel hurt.
That process happens very fast.
Yes, sometimes in seconds. And the more you repeat it, the more automatic it becomes.
So how can someone break that pattern?
The first step is awareness. You need to notice the moment when your mind starts creating stories, not after the emotion becomes strong, but at the beginning.
That sounds difficult.
It is at first, but with practice, you can start catching those thoughts earlier.
And then what?
Then you question them. You ask yourself, is this the only explanation? Or do I have enough evidence to believe this?
That's very powerful. It creates space between the situation and the reaction.
Exactly. And in that space, you have a choice.
Let's talk about relationships again. What makes a relationship emotionally healthy?
I think emotional safety is very important. A healthy relationship allows you to express yourself without fear of being judged or rejected.
That sounds ideal.
Yes, but it also requires effort from both sides. Communication, honesty, and understanding are essential.
And what about self-worth in that context?
Self-worth is what allows you to stay balanced. It helps you not lose yourself in the relationship.
That's very important, because sometimes people give too much of themselves.
Yes, and when they do that, they can become emotionally dependent. Their mood depends on the other person's behavior.
That can be very unstable.
Exactly. That's why self-worth needs to come from within, not from external validation.
I want to ask something more personal. Have you ever overthought something that turned out to be completely wrong?
Yes, many times. I've had moments where I felt anxious about something, created a story in my mind, and later realized that the situation was completely different. And in those moments, I realized how powerful the mind can be, but also how misleading it can be.
That must feel frustrating, but also eye-opening.
Exactly. It teaches you not to trust every thought automatically.
Let's go deeper into self-worth. What does it actually mean to have strong self-worth?
It means recognizing your value as a person, regardless of external situations. It doesn't mean you think you're perfect. It means you accept yourself, including your flaws.
That sounds very peaceful.
Yes, because it reduces the need for constant validation. You don't depend on others to feel okay about yourself.
Before we end, I want to ask one final question. If someone feels trapped in overthinking and low self-worth, what would you say to them?
I would say be gentle with yourself. These patterns take time to change, but the fact that you are aware of them means you are already moving in the right direction. That's very comforting. And remember, your thoughts are not always facts. Just because something feels true doesn't mean it is true.
Let's reflect on today's conversation.
Yes,
Overthinking creates stories.
but not all stories are real.
Self-worth shapes how you see yourself.
And how you experience relationships.
Healthy relationships support you.
But they don't define you.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Keep reflecting, keep growing, and be kind to your mind.
And remember,
Not every thought deserves your belief.
and your worth is already there.
See you in the next episode of Speak Easy Daily Conversations.
Take care.